This is the new Bugatti Chiron. Well, its successor anyway. And this is the man responsible for it. Mate Rimac, how you doing?
Hey, Mate.
You're right?
Yeah.
So, let's have a look at it. Go on, Mate. Reveal it. Whoa, look at that. Wow. What's it called?
This is the Bugatti Tourbillon.
Tourbillon, like an expensive watch.
It's a mechanism in high-end watches that increases accuracy.
Ah, right. Let's find out all we need to know about this amazing new Bugatti. I'm going to show you around its design. Look at this. I'll take you inside its crazy interior.
Fixed hub steering wheel.
I'll ask Matty some very difficult questions.
You know, I don't think that our customers are stupid.
And I'll be completely shocked to find out something about this car's engine I just wasn't expecting.
So you have all the
Whoa!
torque. What?
Okay, Mate, the first thing I want to talk about is the big thing, really. The thing that you first unveiled about this car, and everyone went, what? V16, right? So now one of the great things about the W16 is that for packaging, it makes it quite short, doesn't it? Because the way the cylinders sort of overlap shortens the engine. V16, it's like 2 inline 8 cylinders. In fact, I want to show you something, just bear with me. You've got these little like coasters here. Check this out, right? Look how long that is. That's 16 cylinders. This is sort of how they're arranged here.
It's actually a meter-long crankshaft, and it's actually like 400 millimeters longer than a W16.
So 40 centimeters, blimey. But before Mate says anything else about this incredible engine, you need to understand something very important about this new car. It isn't just a Bugatti Chiron replacement. Matty had the idea for a V16 hypercar before he became CEO of Bugatti in 2021. That was before Bugatti had even started designing the Tourbillon.
A year before you and I met, we made a little model of this car with a V16 with 3 electric motors and so on, because this was what I took to pitch to, at that time, CEO of Volkswagen. And one of the things was, when you talk about the V16, about how long it is, I didn't know if it is a good thing or a bad thing for the designers to make the car longer. And they told me, like, please just don't make it longer. Like, no way. Like, that's the worst for design. And then we had to figure out, so 40 centimeter longer engine, plus a big battery, this is 25 kilowatt hours, that's very substantial for this kind of car, plus 3 electric motors, plus an 8-speed gearbox, which is now behind the engine, and without making the car any longer. So in the end, we turned out to be 27 millimeters longer wheelbase, which is nothing compared to all the stuff that's in there.
How about in terms of the actual length of the car?
It's, I believe, also like 27.
Similar. But with your original concept then, you went V16 hybrid. You didn't go, oh, what we're going to do is reskin a Navera.
No way. So this was actually, let's say, the request of some of the people from Volkswagen and Porsche at that time, because at that time it was like everything's going electric, so Bugatti needs to go electric as well. I just thought that's the wrong thing to do. Bugatti is about pushing the limits, it's about moving the level up, and therefore it needed a successor to the Chiron, and then you decide the powertrain type. I would say there was lots of pressure to go electric, and you know, the easiest thing for us would have been take the Navera. It's 2,000 horsepower car already, 4-wheel drive, very high top speed, so it would be reasonable to reskin it as a Bugatti, but I just thought it was the wrong thing. So V16, the idea came about because we know how to make a very, very high performance electric powertrain. When you have a combustion engine with a hybrid system, why then, you know, also make the combustion engine boring with, you know, turbocharging and so on. I mean,
are you thinking about that SF90 again?
I learned a lot by driving that car. Okay. And some of the things I don't want to do. The Chiron engine, we call it peak engine. So there will be never a more crazy engine, you know, with quad turbos and W16 and so on. We were crazy enough to develop a completely new combustion engine in this day and age. Opposite of downsizing, this is actually bigger displacement.
Okay, so what is it then?
8.3.
Old one was 8 litre.
Because we had this very powerful electric powertrain, it kind of masks some of the downsides of not having a turbocharged engine. So you have all the torque. What? Naturally aspirated.
Yeah, the pennies just dropped.
Oh, you didn't know? It's naturally aspirated, yeah. Exactly.
This is going to be amazing.
Exactly.
What does it rev to?
9,500.
So higher than a GT3 RS?
Yeah.
Have you got some like audio footage of it?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to cut that in now. Okay, so we've got that. Let's talk about the electric bit, the bit that you're famous for, electric propulsion, ever since your E30 days, drifting around on YouTube. You know, see, folks, it's all possible.
Yeah. Exactly. So we wanted to keep that in the background. So that's an enabler for the engine. So the engine is the showpiece. Electric part of it, it's like Formula 1 level of technology. Like the battery cells are oil-cooled, submerged. The electric motors spin up to 24,000 RPM. Each one can produce up to 400 horsepower, they weigh just like 21 kilos each.
Okay, so we've got 1200 horsepower.
But they are limited by the battery.
By the battery, how much? Yeah, because that's always the limiting factor. Because sometimes you do the maths when you add up the motor power and it never reaches what you expect.
Exactly.
It's how many electrons you can push out the battery.
Exactly.
What can you provide from the electric motors altogether in one go?
800 and 1000 from the combustion engine.
So you've done the right thing by making sure that the car has overall more power than the Chiron and the Chiron Super Sport, which was 1600. What's the combined torque figure now with the electric motors?
This is 2300.
So tell me about the gearbox.
So it's rear mounted. You would be able to see it if you didn't have the license plate and electric motor mounted on that gearbox, so 8-speed double clutch gearbox. Then the same 2 electric motors in the front.
So there's no power going from that engine to the front wheels, it's just electric motors?
There is no drive shaft. We use the tunnel to fill it up with batteries.
So in terms of the weight then, let me guess, if you've got it under 2.
Chiron was right under 2.
Yeah.
And the 25 kilowatt hour battery is 200 kilograms on its own, plus 3 electric motors, plus a bigger engine and all of that. And our goal is we are still, fine honing that, but we want to be under the weight of the Chiron.
I thought you were just making excuses then. I thought you were going to go, well, it's 2.1,
No.
Really? So it's going to be under 2?
Yes.
One of the ways Bugatti will reduce the weight of the Tourbillon is by 3D printing the suspension components. It uses AI to design each part. It's all very clever, and this will be the first road-going production car to use this technology.
So you can see all of these organic shapes, which give it stiffness and reduce weight.
So you say organic shapes, it's rather than your usual kind of cross members to brace, it's almost like how your bones are structured
Exactly.
in a way.
So usually with traditional manufacturing methodologies like forging, casting, machining, you're limited in the kind of geometry that you can do. Here you're not limited with geometry. So basically what you do, you give some kind of, let's say, AI software limitations. You tell them where the pickup points are and which other limits in terms of space you have, and then you give it the forces. So the forces when you brake and accelerate, the forces when you hit bumps, and then it starts with a block of metal and removes to see where it then has the most stress, and where the stress is, it leaves the material, and then you get this kind of shape.
So essentially it's worked out that actually a hole there isn't that big a deal.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
we'll just remove it because we don't need the weight.
Yeah, if you had the material there, it wouldn't increase stiffness, it would just add weight.
The suspension isn't the only bit of extreme engineering on this car. The Tourbillon represents a completely new generation of Bugatti hypercars. Sure, it retains some classic Bugatti design features such as the horseshoe grille, the central spine and the two-tone side profile. But all the engineering that you can't see is on another level, and it's all been designed in a completely different way from the old Veyron and Chiron.
And this is all not just, let's say, design on top of a technical concept, but actually this comes like from one hand, where the technical concept and the design and the packaging all work hand in hand. Just as an example, the gearbox on the Chiron used to be in front of the engine, so between the passengers, so you're sitting further apart. Now the gearbox is behind the engine, and then we have a battery in the middle and a bit behind the seats, but the battery is narrower, so the passengers come closer, and therefore we can move the whole greenhouse, so the windows closer, so you have a more pronounced shoulder line, and the whole cabin is a bit lower, so you have the same space inside, but everything is lower, so we have a lower frontal area, which is very important for drag and for top speed.
We'll come to the top speed in a moment, so I think it's going to be higher than before. So what's going on here at the front of the car?
So it's pretty interesting actually, because when you are sitting in a Chiron, for example, your left foot is pushed slightly inwards and you can actually see the shape of the wheel arch. So you have this very short front overhang where you need to package all the crash absorption for the front impact. And now we have two 400 horsepower electric motors in there, all the cooling for the combustion engine and for the electric powertrain, plus more trunk space. So one interesting thing is the trunk opening is very narrow. The difference is in the Chiron you had like a radiator standing here in the middle and the air went through it and then under the car, which is not that great for aerodynamics at top speed. So what we did now, we have the radiators left and right standing like this, and then the air is going around the trunk and then exiting here, which actually gives a downforce. And then in the front we have these flying fenders, as we call them. Air is actually flowing under the lights, going around here on the shoulders and compressing the air a bit, and everything helps with a naturally aspirated engine for the air intake, which is here.
Okay, I do have a question though. So air comes in there past the radiators. Doesn't that mean that luggage is going to get a bit warm?
There was a much bigger problem before because heat naturally goes up. So before you had the trunk on top of the radiator, now the radiators are left and right, so it doesn't really radiate so much heat in the middle anymore.
So what's the capacity of that then?
I don't know.
You do.
It's just
8.3 litres, that's all you need to know. And you talked about it being more muscular. I can really see that over the rear wheel arch. Like the back end just seems quite wide.
That's actually an optical illusion. We call it the Coke can effect, like the Coke bottle effect. Like if you are standing here, and you know, I would bet my kidney that the rear.
I'm betting right now.
But it's not.
Okay, I've lost a kidney. I've got another one though, so that's fine. All of this contouring here, just going, oh, it's so nice. And that's one of the things I really liked about the show, this C shape. It's less C-like, it's a bit more like angular.
So one of the things that enabled this whole interior concept is the lower frontal area, which allowed us to do some things that usually you wouldn't be able to, which increases drag a bit to get a better design. So for example, having such an exposed engine. So the aerodynamicist wanted to have a longer roof to close this more up or to have a glass above it. And I was like absolutely against that.
Poor aerodynamicist. Okay, I'm going to be really silly about this. One of my concerns with the Revuelto, that's got an exposed engine as well. It's like, I'm a bit worried about having my engine exposed, like when it's raining and...
No, it's completely fine. This is designed for everyday usage. This is not designed to be a showpiece in a museum.
Quite a few will be showpieces in the museum though, won't they? Moving on to the back here, because this is amazing, this spine. That looks absolutely cool. But this rear end, it's a production car.
No, we have to adhere to all the same homologation and crash testing like normal cars. There's a couple of party tricks in here. First of all, there is no crash beam. So usually you would have an aluminum or steel structure under a bumper. And we don't have that because the diffuser is not just the diffuser, it's also the crash structure. And then the fact that the diffuser is so tall, this height basically at your knee, what that means is it starts really early in the car, like in the middle of the car. Why is it like that? Because a diffuser in this kind of car configuration, you can only have an angle of like 11 degrees. Otherwise, the air separates from it and it doesn't work anymore. And in order to do that, the whole car had to be designed around it. For example, the engine is angled, and the engine, now not being a W16, is very narrow, so the Venturi tunnel starts under the seat.
I do ridiculous things in my video, but look at this, right? Let's see how far in I can get. Look at this. Look, you can see the suspension.
And then the exposed wheel. So the wheel will actually be exposed like this.
This part alone is going to sell the car.
And we still have a big active wing. Actually, because of the diffuser, we don't need it at top speed. So at top speed, you don't want to have a lot of downforce because the tires are anyways under such a huge load. So we can do top speed without deploying the wing, but we still use the wing for air brake and handling mode.
That brings on to the tyres then. Are they bespoke tyres for this car?
Yes, this is a partnership with Michelin. All the learnings from the Veyron and the Chiron now flew into, again, completely new tyre to make it even more resistant to even higher speeds.
I've got to say, Mate, I really like the tail light design. I've just noticed the way Bugatti is written in there as well. It's really nice.
The other cool thing is the third stoplight. One of the Bugatti design features is the center line, because Bugattis in the 20s and 30s, when they were joining the two halves of the car, they were from an alloy that you couldn't weld at the time. So they were connecting it with rivets, like airplanes, in the middle. So it had this line which we then keep until today, but we managed to also give it a function in this case with this third stoplight. And you can see it's huge, but it's under this angle where actually when you are behind the car, you just see a small portion of it, right? What happens when you deploy the spoiler? You don't have enough surface area anymore for the homologation, so you have another little stoplight under here when the spoiler is deployed so that you have enough surface area.
Good old homologation. So tell me the thing about homologation for the Bugatti writings. On every car, will it be illuminated when you're driving or not?
In some markets, it's only allowed when stationary. In some markets, when you're driving.
Do you think some people might say the rear end is reminiscent of another hypercar from probably 10, 15 years ago? An English one, maybe?
You mean P1?
Maybe. It's quite similar.
I would rather say it's the Lava Tournoi.
All right. Anyway, the intricate design details don't stop there. There's another very special feature that explains this car's rather unusual name.
Tourbillon, one of the reasons why we call the car like that is because watches have beautiful mechanisms. Sometimes it's not even transparent. You don't even see it unless you open it, and most customers don't. So for us, what we want to achieve with this car is that every piece of it is perfection. Every piece of it is a piece of art that you can pick up and put on the wall. And you can see that principle also with the interior. We call this skeleton design. So you have a lot of transparency. If you had now the knobs in here, with which you control like media and infotainment and HVAC system and so on, you see the mechanics inside. This is machined crystal glass. And you see it's not flat. It actually has this shape, which is super difficult to get without the glass shattering. And then, you know, this also has to be homologated. You have to shoot dummy heads into this. So
when I first looked at that, you think that's only possible with plastic, right?
You could do it with plastic, but...
Yeah, I know, but that's what you'd think it was.
In a Bugatti, it's...
Wow, and it feels...
No plastic.
Yeah, no plastic, please.
Believe me, I had so many fights, no plastic in the car.
So the name of the car, did you have that concept from the very beginning then? Because it seems to have this theme running through it.
It came a bit later, but actually one of the first things I did when I came to the company We took the whole team and we went to Switzerland to visit a few watchmakers because we had this idea about analog instruments. It's pretty crazy when you think about it. So naturally aspirated combustion engine from the electric car guy, and then in the interior we wanted to do the digital detox. So no screen. Actually, again, homologation, you have to have a screen. So we have a little one popping out here because when you go in reverse, you have to have a backup camera in some markets.
Okay, so I'm all for this, but what I'm going to do without my Apple CarPlay and Android Auto?
It will have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto just when you want it. But if you desire to not have any screens around you, because press a button, it's gone.
You're talking about all this stuff that's going in the cars and like all this detail that you don't see, and you're talking about like how much it costs to do that. What's it going to cost?
In Europe, it's 3.8 million euros.
And what was the Chiron?
When it was first launched, it was 2.6 million. But when you just do the calculation with inflation, you're actually ending up at the same.
Like the same, yeah.
But then it went up all the way to like 5, 6, depending on the
special editions.
Yes.
How are you managing to do all that with an engine built by Cosworth, all this fine detail for the same price point?
Well, it's mostly development cost.
The Veyron was a loss maker, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, the company was profitable some of its past, but if you take all the 20 years, Ferdinand Piëch really wanted to make a statement of what's possible, and no expenses were spared. That times are over. We need to be profitable with what we are making. So. And what many people feared is like now that Volkswagen isn't behind so much anymore that the quality will go down, but actually we want to go the other direction, even top it up in every level, not just performance and so on, but especially the detail.
And that brings us on to the inside, so let's go check that out.
Yes, let's do it.
Now, one thing about the Chiron was that its doors were rather unexciting, and a hypercar has to have cool doors, so let's see.
So the first Bugatti with dihedral doors. Because the whole cabin is submerged, so you still have the same height inside, but everything is lower. So we have a big cutout now to help you get in and out.
And it's more of a spectacle when you do as well. I mean, look at that. Now, I should point out it's a design model, isn't it? It's not the finished production car. So bits that you see aren't exactly as they'll be on the final car, but the look is what you'll see. Starting with the fact you are sitting lower than in the Chiron, and this is like your ass is on the floor here, isn't it?
Also, another trick how we managed to not increase the length of the car is that the seat is semi-fixed, so you can move it up and down. Backrest is adjustable, but there is no rails to move back and forth. But the pedals are actually moving towards you or away from you, and you can see also the mechanism of the brake is beautiful.
That attention to detail is very similar to Pagani, isn't it? Pagani is like so intricate with the detail.
Well, he was one of my heroes, so I learned some things there.
Notice that you've got an old-fashioned rearview mirror, and you can actually see like through that because you've got obviously like little windows there.
Yes. And the good thing actually about this whole diffuser thing is that you don't have your wing up, so you can actually use the mirror, because currently in the Chiron it blocks it often. And the biggest problem with that is you don't know if you have an interceptor car behind you.
Quite a long way behind you, probably. And one other thing that I've noticed, the Chiron had 2 windscreen wipers. This has one single one, which does the whole windscreen.
Yeah, well, it's lighter, but it's also an extension of the central line that you have all the way from the front to the back. We are thinking about having it programmable so that you can have the wiper go in its, let's say, position where it's hidden. But actually we like this. Another thing is the fixed hub steering wheel. So you have your instruments inside the steering. It never moves no matter how you turn the steering wheel.
The gauges inside the steering wheel show your speed, the engine RPM and horsepower readout. Just like with a Chiron, except the Tourbillon is all analog. And this horsepower gauge actually has 2 needles, one for the electric motors and another for the V16 engine. There's also a temperature gauge, a fuel gauge and an analog readout showing the current battery charge. And they all look spectacular. To be fair, the ones in this car are just a model, so they're not the finished design. Moving back to this steering wheel, so very interested to see the paddle shifters. I've never seen that before.
It's really interesting when you do this kind of different concept. Like we had to develop like a planetary gearbox here behind to make this possible that this stays fixed while this is turning. And then everything is changing, like the whole ergonomy, where you put the buttons, where your fingers go. And you can notice we still have stalks, not like in the Nevera, where we have the buttons on the steering.
Why do you keep stalks and you don't have them in the Nevera?
I remember, for example, Nico Rosberg driving the Nevera, and I could see him all the time trying to shift and trying to find the stalks, like phantom stalks. I sometimes catch myself doing that, and it's like, okay, sometimes it really doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, exactly. I can see cogs and stuff inside there. Obviously, this is just a model. Will it be actually all the cogs all working?
Yeah, so that's actually what's moving the needles.
Okay, so people go on about screens distracting people when they're driving. I'm sorry, that is going to. I'm going to be looking at that.
The thought about that was this car will be around for longer than we are. So in 50 years, in 100 years, this has to be interesting and beautiful.
Okay.
And screens won't.
No, you're right. But I will be looking at it when I'm driving.
You can do that while you're stationary. You can rev the engine and then all of that's moving.
I'm so looking forward to seeing that. You can also control the car's powertrain modes with dials attached to the steering wheel. There's a hybrid mode where the car decides how to distribute its full 1800 horsepower, and there's also a fully electric EV mode, which is limited to just 800 horsepower.
You have 50, 60, 70 kilometers of all electric range, which should be plenty.
70 kilometers all electric, okay.
With 25 kilowatt hours, which is a lot. One thing we haven't yet decided is whether the car would shift the rear motor gearbox when in electric mode only, or you would just drive in like third gear all the time.
No, do the gear shifts.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
I think because that's one thing that you do actually miss with an electric car is that gear shift, and then you can sit, or can you do both?
You could let.
Let's do both.
You could let the driver actually shift.
You should do.
Yeah, we'll try that.
Okay. Hopefully, I get a commission if they do. Matty, if you're listening, I'd happily take a new Bugatti in lieu of payment. But anyway, there's also one final mode called IC, which I think is the most exciting. No electric assistance at all.
Yes.
1,000 horsepower.
Exactly.
To be fair, 1,000 horsepower is going to be bloody quick.
There's no real reason to run it like that.
People will run it like that.
But yeah, I mean, because the hybrid powertrain, you don't really hear it. I mean, the combustion engine should be louder than it. So what's the point of turning off the electric powertrain? But we just, I hate when car companies make decisions for the drivers, for the owners.
Yeah.
I don't think that our customers are stupid. They can decide it. If they have a reason to go full combustion, they can.
And if you're going to be true to that theme, then you have to have manual changes with the electric mode.
That's a good idea.
Sort of backed into a corner there. One of the problems that you can have sometimes when you have a high-performance hybrid car is that the engine's turning off and on all the time. Will that happen here?
No. This car should have 1/3 of the emissions of a Chiron.
Yes.
So Chiron is around 580 grams of CO2 per kilometer. And this car measured in the same way should be around 200. If you, let's say, optimize the hybrid strategy in the WLTP cycle, you would have the engine turn on 15 times, which is pretty annoying. I'm driving lots of other cars and I experienced that recently. I was like, why? Then we did an analysis. How much gain would we have in CO2 emissions if we actually do that versus first time it turns on, keep it on? And the result is like 5 to 10% difference. So probably to avoid the annoyance and the wear on the engine to turn it off and on all the time, just the first time it turns on, it just stays on.
So you can drive along in a hybrid mode and it'll be quick enough because you've got 800 horsepower, but when you floor the throttle, the engine's going to kick in. Once that engine is on, it's on until you turn the car off.
Yes.
Or change mode to electric.
Or this car, the only reason to switch the combustion engine on should be when you are at low state of charge of the batteries. And then why would you shut it down again? You just keep it on.
Yeah. Also, this ties into another special dial, which controls the Tourbillon's chassis modes. This determines how the car will feel to drive, but it also tells it how much electric energy to keep in reserve before the V16 fires up to recharge the battery.
If you are in the electric mode or the hybrid mode, the target state of charge of the battery is 0. But if you are in sport or track mode, the target state of charge of the battery will be higher, 60, 70, 80%. We are still fine-tuning that. So you will never deplete the battery. The car will always keep the battery at that kind of level. So in the, let's say, comfort mode, it's using the maximum to reduce consumption and reduce emissions. But when you are in sport and track mode, it keeps the battery at a state of charge where it can give you the power all the time.
Whenever you need it, okay. And finally, there is a charge mode, which uses the V16 engine as a generator to keep the battery topped up. This will be handy if you want to save the maximum electric range for the last section of your journey, so that when you come home late, your partner doesn't hear you arrive and you can creep into bed, and you don't wake them up and have them telling you off for working too long. So what is the charging rate in this car? Because sometimes with plug-in hybrid, it's not that fast.
Because it's a small battery, it's actually charging really fast. The battery can take really high charge and discharge powers. That's the whole point of this battery. It's very high performance, so very high power density. You can recharge, let's say, from 0 to 80% in like 20 minutes.
Because sometimes with plug-in hybrids, they can only charge at like quite low kilowatts, can't they? Like 22.
Yeah, because they're limited by the onboard charger. This car won't even have an onboard charger. Wanted to make it lighter, so you can only charge it for the DC station.
Will people actually charge the car then, or will they just charge it off the engine?
Yeah, that's the question. Probably most people won't. That's why we didn't want to put in an onboard charger, because it just, like, this car is so tightly packaged. Yeah. Because we didn't want to make it bigger, there was just no space.
So that does bring me on to some key stats, and I don't know if you can give us them. The first one has to be What's the top speed?
It will be limited to 445 kilometers per hour with the top speed key.
Almost 280 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And what about the 0 to 100 kilometers?
Below 2 seconds.
Not a Tesla below 2 seconds, an actual real below 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tesla.
Yeah, below 2 seconds.
And what is the Chiron?
It's slightly above.
Wow. There is one thing I want to ask you, Mate. It's how do you feel about this car compared to the Nevera? Now, the Nevera, obviously you started Rimac.
Yeah.
I should call it Rimats, by the way, but I don't say Porsche correctly, so.
You're good.
Anyhow, how do you feel about it? Because obviously Rimac is your company, your own company, you started it, and obviously from your days of drifting around in that E30 you created to creating that thing, to now being custodian of this brand, how do you feel about the two brands and how do you treat them?
I have like two canvases to play around with that are completely different in my view. Like Bugatti is more about heritage, about the quality, craftsmanship, details, about 115 years of history. While Rimac doesn't have all of that in a positive and a negative way. With Bugatti you have to be very careful to nurture it in the right direction. While with Rimac you can do absolutely nuts things. Like you wouldn't really want to see a Bugatti do crazy four-wheel drifts going backwards and...
Wait, because this is the thing, I feel that you would.
Yeah, but the question is if the, let's say, Bugatti customers and people who are deep in the brand would appreciate that. We as a company have to do the right thing for the brand.
So you get to play in both kind of camps in a way.
Yeah.
But they are both at the very top end of the car market. Will there be anything like lower down in the future?
Well, 6 days after we unveil this thing, we will have the unveil of the Robotaxi, which is a separate company, nothing to do with Bugatti, nothing to do with Rimac. It's just something I'm working on for the last 5-6 years. We will unveil something that's the opposite side of the spectrum.
There is a lot going on, Matty. I don't know how you managed to do it all. Right then, Matty, thank you very much for showing me around this new car. It's super exciting. Hopefully we'll get to drive it.
Of course you will.
When's that going to be possible?
We will start shipping the car in 26.
Okay, so 25 sometime next year?
Yeah, next year.
Because you've still got some development to do on it. Like we say, we're going to figure out about how to have manual gear changes in electric mode. We should definitely do that. Let us know in the comments. Let him know. Oh, one last thing, because we talked about it on the Nevera and I think you fixed it. Window switches, back for up, forward for down.
Yeah, we change that later.
What is it at the moment?
It's the right way.
It's the right way.
Don't worry.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.